Captain Morris, the head of security at Blackwood Pines Mortuary, had already sighed 18 times before he even spoke. His meaty hands were clasped behind his back, his brow furrowed into a permanent state of weary disapproval. "Have you two memorized the rules of the mortuary?" he grumbled, his gaze flicking between me and Eva. "Two women. How am I supposed to deal with this?" I stared at the ceiling. Eva studied the scuff marks on her boots. It took every ounce of our collective willpower not to tell him exactly where he could shove his outdated opinions.
To be fair, I could almost understand Morris's despair. We were the two newest security guards assigned to a place that had become a revolving door for staff. Blackwood Pines had a reputation. Strange sounds echoed from the embalming room and the cold storage units in the dead of night. Whispers with no source, the wet slap of something moving in the dark. One guard, braver or perhaps more foolish than the rest, had gone to investigate. They found him the next morning, conscious but catatonic, laid out on a cold slab in the morgue, a white sheet pulled neatly up to his chin.
Then there were the bodies. Corpses, once neatly arranged in their refrigerated compartments, were found disemboweled, their organs strewn across the sterile floor. Grieving family members holding vigil over their loved ones would drift off to sleep, only to wake with the taste of copper in their mouths, their clothes reeking of a uniquely foul, deathly odor, and their lips smeared with blood that wasn't their own.
The mortuary had invested a small fortune in a state-of-the-art surveillance system, dozens of cameras covering every conceivable angle. But the footage showed nothing, absolutely nothing. The tapes were always clean, depicting silent, empty rooms where unspeakable things had supposedly occurred. The security team, once 15 strong, had dwindled to just 3. Most had quit or simply walked off the job without a word. My partner, Ava, and I were here as a favor to an old friend, Detective Miller, who wanted someone to get to the bottom of it all.
A sudden commotion shattered the tense quiet. Ben, one of the hearse drivers, came sprinting towards us, his face slick with sweat despite the biting cold. "Captain," he gasped, his voice ragged. "The new arrival. There's something wrong. You need to come see this. Now." Eva and I exchanged a look and fell into step behind Morris, our boots crunching on the gravel as we hurried towards the looting bay.
A black hearse was parked squarely in the center of the mortuary's loading bay. The bay was covered by a large awning, a practical design to prevent direct sunlight from touching the deceased. Old superstitions held that a soul, freshly departed from its vessel, could be harmed or even dissipated by the harsh light of the sun. The rear doors of the hearse stood open. Flanking it were 2 young men in security uniforms, their silhouettes stiff with fear.
Ben wiped a trembling hand across his brow. It's bizarre," he stammered. "We can't move the coffin. It won't budge." Captain Morris let out a contemptuous snort, his eyes narrowing. "Don't talk nonsense in the middle of the night. Where are the family members?"
Ben's face went from pale to ghostly white. His voice was a dry rasp. "The relative, he was in the back seat, but he's gone now." Morris sucked in a sharp breath, and even his weathered dark complexion seemed to lose a few shades of color. He looked like a man who had just been told his pension fund was a pyramid scheme.
According to Ben's story, the body had been collected from a derelict village deep in the back country. A place so remote it was practically falling off the map, inhabited by only a few stooped old men and women. When they'd arrived to pick up the deceased, there was no wake,
No mourners, no sounds of weeping. Just a single gaunt man with a gloomy face who handed them a thick red envelope, explaining that his mother had just passed away. As he spoke, Ben fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the red envelope. As he opened it, a thick stack of crisp $100 bills tumbled out, fluttering to the ground like dead leaves. I glanced down. A quick estimate told me it had to be several $1,000s. An absurdly generous and deeply suspicious tip. Ben stared at the cash, looking like a duck that had just been throttled. The two young guards gasped in unison. The taller one, a burly kid with a buzz cut, shuffled nervously toward Captain Morris, his silhouette hunched in misery. "Captain," he began, his voice cracking, "my wife's about to give birth. I can't be away from home. I need to request 2 months' leave to take care of her. I promise, as soon as the baby's a month old, I'll be right back."
Morris's chest swelled with barely contained rage. "Your wife is back home in the Midwest," he growled through clenched teeth. "You worked straight through Christmas last year because you said you couldn't afford the ticket. So where exactly did this baby come from?" The shorter guard, his silhouette shifting nervously, stepped forward. Actually, sir, the baby, it's mine. So I have to go with him to his hometown to help his wife through her confinement."
Eva and I were speechless. We couldn't tell if their story was a masterclass in idiotic improvisation or if they were just that desperate to flee. Morris rubbed his face and let out a long, shuddering sigh that seemed to drain the very life from him. He looked 10 years older. "Fine," he croaked. "Go." The two men didn't need to be told twice. They turned and fled without a moment's hesitation, their footsteps echoing into the night.
"They're gone," Morris said, his face grim. "But the coffin still needs to be moved." He waved a hand in our direction. "I'm an equal opportunity employer. You've seen the situation. If you want to keep working here, you'll help me get this damn thing out. If not, you can leave right now." Eva and I had been given an important task by Detective Miller. We weren't about to back down so easily. I hoisted myself into the back of the hearse, leaning in to get a closer look at the coffin. Morris had talked tough, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. If we left, he'd be the only one on duty for the rest of the night. The dead are just that, dead, I muttered to myself, trying to rationalize the unease creeping up my spine. Scary at first, but you get used to it. I shook my head, my expression hardening. This wasn't normal. The deceased was an old woman, perhaps in her 70s. Her face was a waxy, bloodless white, her body emaciated. Her cheeks were so hollowed out they looked like dark pits, and her lips were pulled back from her teeth in a blackish snarl. Her cheekbones jutted out at sharp angles, so prominent they looked like they were about to tear through the thin, parchment-like skin. The sight was so jarring it made me think of knives. "Focus, Amelia," I told myself. My stomach rumbled. Had I even eaten dinner?
A sharp cough from Eva pulled me from my strange reverie. "Look at her stomach," she said, her voice low and steady. Curiosity overriding their fear, Morris and Ben, who hadn't dared to look closely at the body before, now hesitantly leaned in.
"Oh, God!" Morris gasped, instinctively recoiling. The old woman's limbs were as thin as sticks, skeletal and frail, but her abdomen was grotesquely swollen, distended like a woman in the final month of a difficult pregnancy. An old woman like this? How could she be pregnant? He whispered, horrified. "Ben, did the family say anything about the cause of death?" As he spoke, he unconsciously rested his hand on the edge of the coffin. In that exact moment, the old woman's arm shot up. A dry, bony hand clamped onto Morris's wrist with shocking strength. "Ugh!
Morris screamed, yanking back with all his might, but the skeletal grip was like a vice. No matter how much he struggled, the emaciated hand held fast.
Ben let out a piercing shriek. "She's alive! A revenant!" He scrambled out of the hearse, intending to run for his life, but after 2 frantic steps, he slammed directly into the chest of a man dressed in black. "Get a hold of yourself," a sharp, commanding voice snapped.
It was only then that I got a clear look at the newcomer. He was tall and handsome, with a severe, intelligent face and cold, appraising eyes. He bore a faint resemblance to Detective Miller. This had to be Dr. Alastair Croft, Miller's cousin and the forensic pathologist who frequently consulted at the mortuary. A sudden thought struck me. When Morris had drilled us on the rules earlier, he'd repeated one of them 3 times. Be careful of the medical examiner. Why? Miller was a stand-up cop. Was Croft some kind of outwardly respectable man with a dark, twisted secret? Croft's sharp rebuke seemed to shock Ben into a semblance of calm. He quickly ducked behind the doctor, tugging at his coat sleeve. "Dr. Croft, a revenant. She's come back to life." Alistair Croft's brow furrowed in irritation. He contemptuously shook Ben's hand off his arm. "I've told you people countless times, the phenomenon you call coming back to life is nothing more than cadaveric spasm. Immediately after death, for a short period, the body's tissues and cells retain some physiological function. They can still react to external stimuli. The body that suddenly sat up in the crematorium last month. Same reason. Now stop spouting this superstitious nonsense in my presence."
After scolding Ben, he shot a dismissive glance at Eva and me, his eyes finally landing on Captain Morris's predicament. Croft bent down, climbed into the hearse, and reached out, taking hold of the corpse's gray, desiccated wrist. Strangely, the moment he applied the slightest pressure, the dead woman's hand released its grip. Morris tumbled backward onto the asphalt, gasping for air. He managed a smile that was more hideous than a grimace. "Thanks, Dr. Croft." Alistair Croft pulled a packet of wet wipes from his coat pocket and meticulously cleaned each of his fingers before hopping decisively out of the hearse. "All right, get the coffin down." I shook my head, speaking up before I could stop myself. "We can't. The coffin can't be placed on the ground." It was an old piece of lore, one my grandmother had taught me. A coffin for the living, a coffin for the dead. If a coffin carrying a body touches the earth before its time, disaster follows. With the deceased sitting up, you can't carry her. The living will fall. I knew it sounded like superstition, but a cold certainty had settled in my gut. This body cannot be moved. Croft's gaze snapped towards me, sharp as a scalpel. The temperature in the loading bay seemed to drop several degrees. "What did you just say?" He closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, squatting down so his face was level with mine. He stared at me, his eyes dark with a chilling, latent fury. "You're the new guard? What did you say? If you have the guts, say it again." "I'm not one to be easily intimidated. The coffin cannot touch the ground." A sharp rap echoed in the confined space. Eva let out a yelp of pain, her body freezing in shock. I was just as surprised. Croft had meant to flip my forehead, but I'd reacted instinctively, leaning away at the last second. His finger had connected squarely with Eva's brow instead. Seeing me dodge him, Croft's eyes narrowed. So young and already so superstitious? Stop reading so many ghost stories. You'll rot your brain. Eva, incandescent with rage, shot to her feet. "You hit me! You actually dared to hit me? Gurgle, 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 gurgle. Eva fell silent instantly. Croft spun around, his eyes locking onto the female corpse. The sound was coming from her swollen stomach. The old woman's eyes, previously shut tight, were now wide open, staring blankly at the roof of the hearse,
as if someone were prying her eyelids apart. As the three of us stood there, paralyzed by the sight, Morris and Ben shakily helped each other to their feet. They took one brave glance into the coffin and immediately stumbled back, nearly tripping over themselves in their haste to get away. "Dr. Croft," Morris stammered, his voice on the verge of tears. What is that?" Ben was too terrified to speak. The corpse's abdomen continued to pulse and emit that strange, wet, gurgling sound. Croft, his face a grim mask, reached in and lifted the woman's burial shroud. Her grayish, bloated stomach was exposed to the cold night air. The skin was stretched so thin it was nearly transparent, revealing a horrifying web of blue veins thick as tree roots. The pale flesh rippled continuously like a disturbed pool of water, accompanied by the ceaseless gurgling. If one possessed the sight, they would have seen a terrifying vision. A hunched, white-haired old woman, a ghostly double, perched on the edge of the coffin, repeatedly blowing puffs of spectral air into the corpse's mouth. With every puff, the dead woman's belly would ripple and groan. "This body is compromised," Croft declared, his voice tight. "Ben, where were you originally supposed to take her?" Ben's voice floated back from a safe distance. "The family said the burial is in 2 days. According to procedure, she'd go to the preservation room."
Dr. Croft didn't wait for a response. He adjusted the collar of his coat, a gesture of finality. "Take this body to the autopsy room. I'm going to the precinct to file a report and get approval for a full examination. I suspect the cause of death is not what it seems." He then gestured for Ben and Morris to help carry the body. The two men approached hesitantly, Captain Morris looking particularly stressed. "Dr. Croft," he started, "we already tried. The coffin wouldn't move an inch. It's unnatural, I'm telling you. If you don't believe me, just..." His words died in his throat. This time, when they lifted, the coffin came up with surprising ease. It felt almost weightless.
Ben and Morris stared at each other, dumbfounded, as they carried the body and placed it on a nearby gurney. "I'll be back from the precinct shortly," Croft stated. "Make sure the body is waiting for me in autopsy." And with that, he was gone. Ben, seeing his chance, muttered a flimsy excuse and practically sprinted to his hearse, peeling out of the parking lot as if the hounds of hell were on his tail. The sprawling, empty bay was suddenly silent, leaving just the three of us and the body on the gurney. It was only then that Captain Morris turned to us, his face a mask of anguish. "Didn't I tell you to memorize the rules? Why did you have to provoke Dr. Croft?" According to Morris, Alistair Croft was a man of petty grudges and a venomous tongue. His signature move, a sharp, demeaning flick to the forehead, wasn't just for subordinates. Rumor had it he'd even done it to the chief of police during a heated disagreement. In this mortuary, he was a king in his own macabre kingdom, and no one dared to cross him.
Even I stood there, stunned. She was still rubbing her red forehead, looking at Morris in disbelief. "You're telling me be careful of the medical examiner meant this?" I felt a wave of helplessness. "Then what do the other rules mean?" Morris's mouth clamped shut instantly. A secretive, knowing look passed over his obscured features. "You'll find out soon enough. Now let's get this body to the autopsy room."
The parking bay was on the east side of the mortuary. From east to west, the northern wing housed the body processing facilities, the memorial halls, and finally, the crematorium. The southern wing was a long row of private viewing rooms for wakes. The entire layout, as Morris explained while we pushed the gurney, was designed to symbolize the journey from east to west, escorting the dead to their final resting place in the land of paradise. Tonight,
"I'll take the first shift with you both," he said, his voice low. "Tomorrow we'll start a proper rotation."
Eva and I said nothing. We couldn't, because at that very moment, the ghost of the dead old woman was standing right beside her own corpse. Her form was translucent, shimmering at the edges. She watched us with a somber expression, her spectral eyes sweeping over each of us before finally settling on Captain Morris. I understood now. The coffin had been impossible to lift because she had been sitting on it. She had only moved after Dr. Croft declared his intention to perform an autopsy. I didn't know what she wanted, what her purpose was, so I could only pretend not to see her. "All right, leave it here," Morris instructed as we entered the cold, sterile autopsy room. Flicker, flicker, pop. The overhead fluorescent lights flickered violently a few times before dying completely, plunging the entire room into absolute darkness and deafening silence. Captain Morris's breathing suddenly became ragged and desperate. Who's there?" he choked out. In the pitch-black room, I couldn't see a thing. Eva and I stood frozen to one side, relying only on sound to piece together what was happening. It sounded like Morris was struggling with someone, a desperate, muffled fight. A single choked scream cut through the darkness, and then silence. The lights flickered back to life as suddenly as they had died. The abrupt glare made me squint. Eva rushed forward and grabbed my arm, her voice a high-pitched whisper. "Emilia, look!" Captain Morris was sprawled on his back on the tiled floor. His uniform was torn, and around his neck were several dark, sooty handprints, as if someone had tried to strangle him. But the ghost of the old woman was still standing right where I had last seen her, by the gurney, unmoving. And I couldn't sense any other spectral presence, no other cold spots in the room. Could it be? Besides the three of us and the ghost, was there a fourth entity in this room? "Let's get the captain to the break room," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. We half-carried, half-dragged Morris's dead weight out of the room. The old woman's ghost merely stood there, frowning at her own body, showing no intention of following us. The hour was late, and the long, dark corridors of the mortuary seemed to stretch on forever. In the few short hours since we'd arrived, we had lurched from one bizarre incident to the next. If we were ordinary security guards, I have no doubt we would have been long gone. This place, it was profoundly wrong. After laying Morris on a cot, I touched the marks on his neck. Eva rubbed one of the black smudges with her thumb and brought it to her nose. "It's incense ash," she confirmed. The south wing of the mortuary was lined with viewing rooms where families held wakes, burning incense day and night. It wasn't strange for ash to be floating around, but who or what had used it to choke Captain Morris? I sat down heavily, the mystery deepening with every passing minute. Morris was only unconscious. His pulse was steady. I covered him with a blanket, and Eva and I quietly left the room. We had a decision to make. We were going to sweep the entire mortuary. We needed to know what we were really dealing with.
We had already seen the parking bay and the body processing area. We methodically cleared the rest of the facility, from the cosmetology suite to the reconstruction lab, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, we reached the south wing, the long hall of viewing rooms. Blackwood Pines had over 20 of them, large and small. But tonight, nearly all were dark and empty. The recent string of strange events had scared most families into simplifying their funeral rites, many forgoing the tradition of an overnight wake entirely. But as we neared the westernmost end of the hall, we saw it. A single figure inside the last room. On a long pew inside, a young man sat alone. He was shockingly thin, with pale skin, sunken cheeks, and a tall, lanky frame that made him look like a fragile reed. He looked up as we entered, his eyes startled. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a pack of cigarettes, and offered one to us. Smoke? Rule number 4. If someone in a viewing room offers you a cigarette, do not accept. I remembered Morris's frantic insistence that we memorize the rules. A slow smile touched my lips. I politely took the cigarette from his outstretched hand and tucked it behind my ear. Rules were made to be broken. Besides, it was rare for anyone to offer a smoke to 2 young women on the night shift.
The young man seemed to visibly relax when I took it. My eyes drifted around the room, settling on a black and white portrait of a middle-aged woman on a memorial stand. "That's my mother," the young man sighed, his voice low and gravelly. "Cancer. My father died young. She raised me all by herself. So no matter what kind of demons or ghosts haunt this place, I have to stay. I have to see her off on her final journey." I glanced from the photo, a round-faced woman with large eyes and a thick nose, to the young man before me, with his narrow eyes and high-bridged nose. To put it bluntly, they looked nothing alike. "First time I've seen female security here," he continued, his tone shifting. He seemed cold, but was surprisingly talkative. "You two must have guts. Must be getting sleepy this late at night, huh? Have a smoke. It'll wake you up." He enthusiastically flicked his lighter, offering us the flame. A strange, cloying aroma filled the air. "Why aren't you smoking? What, is my brand not good enough for you? You looking down on me?" His mood shifted as quickly as a summer storm. I smiled calmly. "Sir, this cigarette can't be smoked. This is for the dead." I held it up. "This has been infused with graveyard incense. It's packed with the fur from a black cat's tail and laced with oil rendered from the corpse of an infant. It was an old, dark piece of lore, a concoction known as Revenant's Leaf, meant only as an offering to wandering, hungry ghosts. If a living person were to smoke this," I finished, "it would be like snuffing out their own spiritual flame. It makes you vulnerable, an easy vessel for possession." The man's expression changed, his silhouette stiffening. His voice became a low growl. "What's that supposed to mean? You insulting me?"
Before things could escalate, Eva stepped in smoothly, producing a gleaming, opulent-looking carton of cigarettes. "Sir, don't be angry. Smoke these. We have our own." "What the hell is that?" The man's eyes nearly popped out of his head. "Everett and Crane Imperials?" I couldn't help but twitch a smile. Before coming here, I told Eva to prepare some cigarettes to make it easier to talk to people. Naturally, she'd gone for the most absurdly expensive brand she could find. A rare artisanal smoke that supposedly cost over $200 a pack. The young man trembled as he took the carton, completely stunned by Eva's display of wealth. Money, it seems, makes even ghosts give way. Eva generously shoved the entire carton into his hands.
He stared down at it, his silhouette a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. After a long moment, he grit his teeth and leaned in, his voice a harsh whisper. "This mortuary is evil. You two get back to your break room. After 1 a.m, no matter what you hear, do not come out. Remember that. If you want to live, don't leave that room before dawn." And with that, the warning from the strange young man echoed in my ears, but it was still well before 1 a.m. Eva and I, driven by a gnawing curiosity, decided to check the last major area on our list, the main memorial hall. It was the largest room in the complex, decorated in a classical style that was both elegant and somber. It reeked of money.
See, I nudged Eva with my elbow. Even in death, the rich do it with more style. Eva just curled her lip, her silhouette radiating disdain. Still looks tacky, not up to my standards. We hadn't even finished our banter when the grand chandeliers in the hall began to flicker erratically.
Amelia, look,
Eva whispered. The hall was laid out like a grand auditorium, with a raised dais at the front for the casket display. In the dim, strobing light, a figure had appeared in the front row of seats. It was the back of a young woman. She was wearing a crimson, antique-style burial gown, her jet-black hair piled high in a complex arrangement that reached down to her waist. To see such a figure appear so suddenly would be unnerving for anyone, but for me, the most chilling part was what I didn't feel. There was no cold spot, no whisper of spiritual energy. She wasn't a ghost.
"Who are you?" I called out, my voice sharp and clear. My only reply was a silvery, bell-like laugh that seemed to echo from every corner of the hall at once. Eva and I exchanged a glance and took a single step forward. In that instant, the woman in red vanished. The lights went out, then flared back on a second later. She was now lying in the center of the main floral wreath on the casket dais. Her face was chalk white, her lips a smear of blood red. What in God's name was this thing? "What are you two doing in here?" Captain Morris's voice boomed from the entrance. He came rushing in, his silhouette radiating displeasure. "Why are you wandering around? Have you forgotten what I told you?" Strangely, the moment he appeared, the hall returned to normal. The woman in red was gone.
I studied him with a critical eye. "Captain, did you see that woman just now?" Morris looked around wildly and then glared back at me. "What woman? There's no one here but you two. You kids have too much nerve for your own good. Disobey the rules and you'll find trouble." When I brought up the incident in the autopsy room, he brushed it off, claiming he had high blood pressure and was prone to fainting under stress. He insisted he'd simply passed out and woken up in the break room. As he spoke, his silhouette kept shifting, his posture betraying a clear lie. He herded us back to the staff room, poured us 2 cups of hot water, and stressed the rules one last time. "All right, I'll take the first watch. You two get some sleep until 4 a.m., then you can relieve me." He then hurried out, and we heard the distinct click of the door being locked from the outside. I took a sip of the water and frowned. Eva tried the doorknob. "It's locked," she confirmed. "Morris definitely has a problem. His desperation to keep us from quitting was obvious. He was playing dumb about all the strange happenings, afraid of scaring us off. But his story had more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. The man in the viewing room said not to leave after 1 a.m. We decided to take a short rest. At precisely 1:30 a.m., I picked the lock in seconds, and we slipped out into the silent hallway, heading for the one place we knew held the most secrets, the embalming room.
The embalming room was where the nameless dead were stored, the John and Jane Does who were warehoused indefinitely. The north wall was dominated by a massive bank of refrigerated body lockers. We did a quick sweep and found nothing unusual. We sat on a gurney, frowning. "If you can't ask the living," I murmured, "then ask the dead." These bodies, locked away without names or rights, their souls couldn't have moved on. They should be here.
I pulled out a small censer and lit 3 sticks of soul-guiding incense. "Spirits adrift, find your shelter. Return from 1,000 miles, swift as the law commands." 3 thin plumes of smoke rose straight into the air, forming 3 perfect vertical lines. Eva stared. "No souls," she breathed. "The smoke is straight. No ghosts are coming to the call." It was impossible. This mortuary was full of bodies.
How could they all be soulless? Unwilling to give up, I lit 3 more sticks of the highest grade incense, a type so potent no spirit could resist its call. We watched with wide eyes as the fragrant smoke rose, but even as the sticks burned down to ash, not a single spirit appeared. "This is wrong," Eva muttered, scratching her head. "The old woman from tonight. Her ghost is still in the autopsy room. Why didn't she come?" A horrifying thought dawned on me. "Oh no, we have to get to the autopsy room now!" I sprang up, grabbing our gear.
Click, clack, click, click. The sound of the locker handles turning, one after another, froze us in our tracks. The first drawer slid open with a metallic groan, then the second, then the third. Eva and I stared, mouths agape, all thoughts of running forgotten. Soulless bodies, moving on their own? Of course not. "Don't look," I hissed. "Run!"
We bolted for the door, yanking on the handle. It was locked. Damn it. Eva kicked the steel door in frustration. The temperature in the room was plummeting. All the lockers were open now, revealing dozens of body bags. Slowly, methodically, the zippers began to slide down. Pale, purple, and blackened hands emerged. Large hands, small hands, long fingers, short fingers. Some were covered in sharp claws. Others sprouted green and white fur. It was a grotesque, multicolored nightmare. "Are these all revenants?" Eva whispered, her voice trembling. Revenants. Soulless, animated corpses. They couldn't be killed because they were never truly alive. That's why the incense didn't work. To turn a corpse into a revenant required specific, foul conditions. Burial in a place of immense negative energy, completely shielded from the sun. The process took years, even centuries, but these bodies had never been buried. How could this be?
A green-skinned revenant, the most powerful kind, lurched off its slab and hopped towards us. I pulled a breaking talisman from my pocket and slapped it on the door handle. "By law and order, open!" Just as its claws were inches from my face, the lock clicked open. We screamed and threw ourselves through the door, but I skidded to a halt. There were still people in this building, a village 3 miles away. If this horde got out, "Eva, block the door!" I slammed my body against it while fumbling for another talisman. A green clawed hand shot through the gap. Eva shoved her hip against the door and threw a handful of glutinous rice at the hand. It shrieked and recoiled. My fingers found the talisman, and as I slapped it on the door, it flashed with golden light, sealing the door shut.
We collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. "What are you two doing?" A dark figure stood over us, Dr. Croft, his face a mask of annoyance. "This is a mortuary, not your personal playground." Before I could scream a warning, he reached out and tore the talisman from the door. My master was right. Nothing good ever comes from getting involved with men. Boom!
A tremendous force erupted from behind the door, blowing the heavy steel panel off its hinges. The 3 of us were thrown to the floor. I staggered up, my head spinning, and my heart sank. A horde of multicolored revenants stood in the doorway, snarling and baring their teeth. Croft pushed himself up, saw the undead horde, and his face purpled with rage. He strode forward and flicked the foreheads of the first few revenants. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "You delinquent youth, vandalizing public property!" The revenants, who had faced fire and sword, but never a condescending forehead flick, froze in confusion. "Put the door back this instant! Where are your parents? I'll have them pay for this."
"Eva," I whispered, "now I understand the first rule. Do not talk to the dead. They're drawn to the breath of the living."
"Are you all deaf?" Croft yelled.
In an instant, a white revenant grabbed him by the throat and hoisted him into the air. He choked and clawed at its hand. "Help me!" he rasped. Eva watched for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, Amelia, go."
I kicked the revenant in the chest and threw my remaining rice at the horde, buying us a precious second. Sparks flew as the rice hit their skin. Croft fell to the floor, and Eva hauled him up, flicking his forehead hard. "What are you looking at? Run!" The three of us sprinted for our lives, the entire horde thundering after us. We crashed through the doors of the autopsy room, hoping to barricade ourselves inside.
The scene inside froze us in our tracks. Captain Morris stood over the old woman's body, which was now cut open and filled with bags of white powder. Surrounding him were a dozen men in black, covered in tattoos and holding guns. They turned as we burst in, raising their weapons. "Crowbar," Croft yelled. "You dare use a corpse to transport drugs?"
I ignored them, my eyes locked on Morris. The woman in red was a projection, wasn't she? You choked yourself to scare us away. You work for them. I looked around the room. The old woman's ghost was gone. Of course, she was angry her body was being desecrated. She only appeared when Croft offered a chance to expose them. A big, beefy man next to Morris, Crowbar, clapped slowly. "Smart girl. Too bad you won't live to tell anyone." "You don't even know who you're working with, do you?" I said, raising my voice. "He's a corpse master." I explained everything, how these sorcerers raised the dead, turning them into puppets. Morris was of the Revenant faction, the most powerful. The man was a mass murderer. Morris's eyes glowed. "Clever girl. You even escaped my horde. Kneel, and I'll make you my apprentice." "Shut up with that nonsense," Crowbar snarled, leveling his gun. "Don't get in the way of my business." I took a step back, a cold smile on my face, and kicked the door fully open behind me. The horde of revenants stood, waiting.
Crowbar and his men stared in horror. I shook a small bronze bell in my hand. By bell's clear tone and binding word, I chanted, my voice ringing with power. "The puppet string is now absurd. To master's will you'll no longer cling. Unmake the thrall, unmake the thing."
At the chime of the bell and the force of the incantation, the psychic tether connecting Morris to his horde snapped. For a moment, the revenants stood still, their heads twitching. Then, sensing the hot, panicked breath of the living gangsters, they surged forward as one. The room erupted into a cacophony of inhuman shrieks, human screams, and the deafening roar of gunfire. We dove for cover behind a steel table, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and old blood.
Through the chaos, I saw Morris's silhouette move with terrifying purpose. He grabbed Crowbar, his supposed partner, and dragged him into the deepest shadows of the room. A single, muffled scream was swallowed by the gunfire. A moment later, Morris emerged alone, his hands dripping with something dark. He knelt, smearing the substance onto the floor in a glistening, arcane pattern. A dark energy pulsed from him, cold and commanding. He had regained control. The entire horde stopped their assault on the few remaining gangsters and turned, their empty eyes fixing on me. The green revenant, its form seeming to suck the very light out of the room, loomed over me. There was a sudden rush of cold air. The world spun into a blur of gray tile and metal, and a sound like a side of beef hitting concrete echoed in my skull. The pain was a white-hot flash. My vision swam. While the revenants swarmed the spot where I had fallen, Eva and Croft seized the opportunity. They burst from their cover and tackled Morris, a tangle of desperate limbs crashing to the floor. Morris let out a piercing shriek of rage, not a human sound, but a command. From the writhing shadows, a dark shape lunged at Croft's neck. "Ah!" He screamed, a choked, agonizing sound, but his grip on Morris didn't loosen. That was the opening.
Pushing through the pain, I scrambled to my feet, launched myself off the autopsy table, and brought the heel of my boot down on the back of Morris. He went limp, his dark power vanishing like smoke. With their master unconscious, the revenants went completely feral. We dragged Morris's inert form out of the room and slammed the door, sealing it just as the first wail of Detective Miller's sirens cut through the night. By the time the sun rose, the battle was over. The autopsy room was a wreck. We captured the last of the revenants, one by one, and threw them onto a massive pyre. The flames turned from red to an oily black as they burned, and their final unholy shrieks echoed against the quiet dawn. Morris, now in cuffs and on his knees, glared at me with pure, undiluted hatred. "The Patchwork Cult in the Harrowfield swamps. They've already raised an iron-skinned demon. You wouldn't dare go." He was trying to lure me into a trap, a final act of spite. "He's telling the truth, isn't he?" Eva whispered beside me. Croft, clutching his bandaged neck, stumbled over. "What are you talking about?" Eva, without missing a beat, flicked his forehead. "Mind your own business." I laughed, a tired, raspy sound. I walked over to the shivering Dr. Croft and gave him a gentle flick on the forehead myself. "Don't say it's the Harrowfield swamps. Even if it were the dragon's den, I'd still go." My path was set. Wherever evil resided, I would follow.